Gracias, Begonia. Is it correct? Perfect. Thank you once again. It's a great pleasure to be here with you in Mexico City today. I'm going to speak about politics, museum authority, and funding, which in a way is the common denominator with, it's what this presentation would share with my previous colleagues, with the two other presentations that have preceded mine. And I'd like to start with something that I'm sure you have heard, read, and I'm sure you know. It's the statement that museums are society's trusted institutions. Museums operate on trust. They collect objects, artworks, and try their very best to make sure that what they are collecting is authentic. If not, they risk their reputation. They are very sensitive to their outreach programming, trying to include diversity, equity, inclusion, and do their very best to make sure that they stand on correct, factual information. And I think it is against this background that we have to look at what is happening in the US, where we have at least two endowments and one institution that is under attack. The National Endowment for the Arts has retrieved, blocked funding for the arts in the US. The National Endowment for Humanities, too, has also refused to fund a number of projects. And the Institute for Museums and Libraries is practically being earmarked to be completely shut down. Now, this is obviously creating a lot of pressure, and our colleagues in the US are hitting back. They are reacting. I happened to be in a conversation a few days ago with colleagues, academic colleagues, who were literally trying to find a way how they can express themselves, because there are museums in the US where a reference to DEI, to diversity, equity, and inclusion, can land you into trouble. We've just heard about the director of the National Portrait Gallery in Washington that has lost her job. And the reason was because she was actually an advocate, she was advocating for DEI. And paradoxically, colleagues from Argentina were actually helping them out and telling them, listen, way back in our case, we would come together, we would work on papers, on research, and try to make sure that this information is coming across and trying to find solutions, possibilities, options on how to deal with the situation by working together and publishing a number of possibilities, ideas, and the way forward on such a particular situation. But then, there is not much difference from what is happening in Europe. I come from Europe. I come from Malta, and I would like to share with you the findings of a research project that was conducted in August 2024. It was conducted by the Network of European Museums Organizations, and it refers to political pressure on museums. 2024, August 2024. That was way before Trump was elected. So we're actually talking of a situation that is not just about Trump, but it's much more complex than that. And this report can be summarized in 4 main points. I'm not going to share these points with you. The first point refers to pressure from interest groups and public opinion influence. Museums in Europe are oftentimes faced with pressure from radical groups on their operations, on their programming, on their outreach, and some of them have actually decided to self-censor themselves, not to express themselves, avoiding difficult topics, difficult subjects, and trying to find a way how to move forward without losing funding. The second point is about political interference in governance. There are instances where ministries, where governments decide who should sit on the board and for what purpose and for what reason, there are also situations where ministries contact a particular museum asking them to work on a specific project, an exhibition project. And there are also situations where funding is used as a political tool. I come back to that in the next few slides. The third point is influence on public actions, which is very much in line with what I have been sharing with you, in the sense that some topics are better left untackled. It's easy, obviously, for the museum to work in the safe zone to avoid difficult topics, to avoid coming up with conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is also Europe. The fourth point I'd like to raise is funding. There is clear evidence that funding is oftentimes used as a control tool. If you do not follow this agenda, then I will not grant funding. Now, this in itself is a paradox for Europe, because the European museum ecosystem depends much more on government funding than the one in the US. If we had to compare the two models, the two ecosystems, the US ecosystem is generally funded through federal government at more or less 20%. So 20% of the funding that would go to museums is generally coming from federal funding. In Europe, government funding is much more. The percentage is way more. And paradoxically, this situation helped the European Museum survive during COVID. Because governments pitched in, they came in, and they actually kept the museum afloat. But this obviously comes with a number of circumstances, because this is when we get to conditional funding. In the US, the Institute for Museums and Library Services was actually created to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And at this point in time, it's being used the other way around. It's being used to actually divest the museum of the possibility to fund such programming. Conditional funding is something that museums are very much aware of. When a sponsor comes along and offers to fund something, there is oftentimes a conditional bait with that. And museums have come to understand how to tackle that in very many ways. Donations also come oftentimes with conditions. I'm going to give you this collection, and this has to be entirely on display. Imagine if the museum had to exhibit all the donations that would be offered across the years. It would need much more than one building. So conditional funding is something that European museums are engaging with. And this is something also that ICOM has taken a position very clearly. I'm quoting what Emma Nardi, the current president of the International Committee of Museums, has stated. We cannot remain indifferent to politics' intrusion into museums. And ICOM is obviously international. It's not just Europe. Europe fits within this statement, but it goes beyond, obviously. This is why we support the funding that museums must receive to carry out their noble activities and oppose any attempt to limit the free conscience of those who work in museums. So ICOM has taken a very clear stand on this matter, but I think this is just part of the story. It is part of the story because museums have been increasingly coming up with cocktails of funding, trying to find ways and means how to support what government provides, and government funding has been on the decrease at least for the past 15-20 years in the US and in Europe as well. So trying to find how the retail facilities of the museum can actually support the outreach program. Tate in Britain is a very good example. Tate has created Tate Enterprise, which is a company that would fund most of the programming that the museum, the network would come up with. So how do we reconcile government funding and the potential that this government funding can be used as a political tool of coercion and to press and to pressure museums to stay back and self-censor them, with the potential, with the need for museums to generate money to balance things out. What future, what present, and from which past are we going to move forward? And I'd like to share with you 2 research projects that have been actually made public earlier this year, 2025, and one of them concerns 8 museums in Finland. This is a research that was conducted by John Falk with a team of researchers, and they came up with the value of museums. It's not just the economical value, it's not just about money, but it's about the social value, the political value, and another value which concerns well-being. Museums that are places where communities can congregate to, where well-being can actually be fostered. And they actually came up with this sum. These 8 museums have a social value of equivalent to more or less 75 million euros. And with every 9 euro of benefit generated, it would come from 1 euro spent. So with every 1 euro that is invested in one of these museums in Finland, there is a return on that investment of 9 euro. So this supports museums in their pitch, in the need to continue to pressure governments to fund their programming. But then there's another research, and I conclude with this, which is coming from North America. This is a research that was conducted by a group of scholars, which concerns museum workers in the US and in Canada. And it's interesting enough that they highlighted the need for funding ethic policies. It seems that the sector does not yet have ethics policies that can guide museums on how to generate funding, the ways and means how to invest that funding. And interestingly enough, 50% of those interviewed said that they don't have such a policy, and 20% weren't even sure they had one, which is even more interesting. So I think there is a possibility in the uncomfortable situation that we are going through, and I think we should be positive in a better future. Thank you.